So imagine you fire a rogue employee. You bring them into the office, you hand them their final paycheck, you take their keys, and you completely lock them out of the computer system.
Right, they are gone. Finished.
Exactly. But because you forgot to ask for their physical business cards back, that furious ex-employee walks across town, sits down with a massive client, and legally binds your company to a multi-million-dollar contract.
Oh, wow.
And the kicker, the courts will actually force you to honor it.
I mean, it is a scenario that keeps corporate lawyers awake at night, just staring at the ceiling. And the scariest part is it happens entirely because of how the law interprets this tiny, invisible concept called apparent authority.
Yeah, it's wild. So if you are listening to this right now, you are sitting in the third chair at our table today. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
We are looking at this incredibly comprehensive academic module today. It details the principles of risk management and insurance. And our mission today is to, well, decode the incredibly dense, sometimes ancient legal architecture of risk that surrounds basically every decision we make.
Yeah, because it's an architecture designed to be totally impenetrable. Like, we look at an insurance policy or a liability waiver, and we just see this undecipherable dialect of legal jargon.
Right, it's just a wall of text.
Exactly. But underneath that jargon is a really fascinating, brutal logic about how society decides who pays when things go horribly wrong.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can even talk about buying insurance or, managing a business, we have to precisely define what risk actually is. The sources make it super clear that in the professional world, risk is not the thing that hurts you.
Right, and that is the first major mental shift we have to make here. In everyday conversation, we just use words interchangeably. We say, that icy road is a huge risk, or that wobbly ladder is a massive hazard.
Yeah, totally.
But in the risk management profession, precision is everything. They break the language of doom down into this fundamental triad: risk, peril, and hazard.
Okay, so I'm looking at the text here, and I want to make sure I'm mapping this correctly to the real world. Let's say you, our listener, decide to quit your day job tomorrow and open a bakery.
Nice.
You sign a lease, you buy industrial ovens, you sink your life savings into this. According to the module, the risk is simply the possibility of a financial loss. Just the possibility that you lose your life savings.
Correct. Risk is just the abstract potential for a negative deviation from what you desire.
Which is to make money.
Right. You desire to make money, so the risk is the possibility you go bankrupt. But the risk doesn't burn the bakery down. That is the peril.
Okay.
The peril is the actual physical cause of the loss. So the fire itself, or the tornado, the flood.
Got it. And the hazard is the thing that accelerates the peril, right? It's the condition that increases the potential for the fire to occur.
Yeah.
So for our bakery, the hazard is like letting flour dust accumulate in the ventilation system until it becomes highly combustible.
Yes, exactly. The flour dust isn't the fire, but it creates this environment where a tiny spark becomes a catastrophic explosion. Wow, yeah.
And what's fascinating here is why financial planners and insurance professionals insist on isolating these three terms. I mean, it's not just semantics. It completely changes your defensive strategy.
How so?
Because you cannot buy an insurance policy against a hazard.
Right. There is no flour dust policy.
Exactly. You insure against the peril, the fire, to mitigate the financial risk. But a smart risk manager spends almost zero time thinking about the peril and practically 100% of their time looking for hazards.
Oh, I see. Because recognizing hazards is the actionable step.
Yes. You clean the vents to manage the risk before the peril ever has a chance to strike.
So if I'm driving down the highway, the risk is the financial and physical ruin of a crash.
Right?
The peril is the actual collision of metal and glass. And the hazard is me deciding to text my mom and eat a messy sandwich while trying to steer with my knees.
That is a terrifying but entirely accurate example. You have actively created a condition that drastically increases the probability of the peril occurring. Well, now that we have the basic vocabulary down, the sources make a huge point of categorizing the unknown. And it turns out the insurance industry draws this massive line in the sand regarding what kinds of risks they're even willing to talk to you about.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's look at static risks versus dynamic risks.
So this division basically explains why your insurance covers some disasters but runs screaming from others. Static risks are events that happen independently of the broader economy.
Like an earthquake.
Right. An earthquake, a localized flood, a lightning strike. These occur with a measurable level of regularity over time, whether we are in an economic boom or Great Depression.
And because they happen with a sort of grim regularity, The actuaries can actually predict them and put a price tag on them.
Precisely. But dynamic risks are the exact opposite. They are born from changes in the economy or society itself.
So like a sudden, massive spike in inflation.
Yeah, or severe recession. Or a technological breakthrough that makes an entire industry obsolete overnight.
Wait, I need to understand the logic here. A severe recession is way more likely to put our listeners' new bakery out of business than a lightning strike.
Definitely.
So why won't an insurance company sell me a recession policy? Why are they so terrified of dynamic risks?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really comes down to the underlying mathematical survival of the insurance company itself.
Okay.
The entire concept of insurance relies on the law of large numbers. It functions by pooling a massive group of people to share the financial losses of a tiny percentage of that group. But for that math to hold up, the losses absolutely must be uncorrelated.
Uncorrelated, meaning if my house burns down, it doesn't increase the mathematical probability that a house 3 states away will burn down on the exact same day.
Right. The premiums collected from the millions of unburned houses easily pay for the few that burned. But dynamic risks, like rampant inflation or a market crash, are highly correlated.
Because if a recession hits, it hits everyone in the pool at the exact same time.
Exactly.
Oh, I see. If everyone in the pool suffers a catastrophic financial loss at the exact same moment, and they all file a claim on the exact same day.
The insurance pool instantly collapses. The company goes bankrupt by noon.
Wow.
That is why dynamic risks are fundamentally uninsurable in the private market. They just violate the core mathematical premise of spreading risk.
That makes perfect sense. The text also divides risks into fundamental versus particular risks, which seems somewhat related to this.
It is. Fundamental risks affect massive groups simultaneously, so a regional hurricane or, again, a national economic depression. Particular risks are localized to individuals or small groups.
Like your specific delivery van getting stolen or someone tripping on the sidewalk outside your specific bakery.
Exactly. But the most important distinction in this entire section, the one that really dictates the boundaries of the industry, is the difference between pure risk and speculative risk.
And this is the absolute dividing line, right?
It really is. A pure risk is a scenario where there are only 2 possible outcomes: a chance of loss or a chance of no loss.
Maintaining the status quo.
Right. There is absolutely 0 chance of a gain.
So my bakery burning down is a pure risk. If it doesn't burn down, I haven't won anything. I don't get a prize. I'm just exactly where I was yesterday. But if it does burn down, I suffer a massive loss.
That is pure risk, and it is the primary domain of insurance. Speculative risk, on the other hand, involves 3 possible outcomes: a chance of loss, a chance of no loss, or a chance of gain.
Like taking my bakery profits to Vegas and putting them all on black. Or, frankly, opening the bakery in the first place hoping the property value goes up.
Exactly. Or buying stocks. You might lose your investment, or you might double it. Speculative risks are inherently uninsurable.
Because if you could insure a speculative risk, you'd basically be asking an underwriter to guarantee your gambling winnings. It removes the entire downside of capitalism.
It completely breaks the model. Insurance is strictly a defensive mechanism to restore you to your baseline. It's not an offensive tool to help you turn a profit.
Okay, so understanding that we can only truly pool and insure pure risks kind of leads us directly into the actual playbook for how professionals deal with them.
Right.
The text outlines this massive 7-step risk management process. And rather than just reading a list, let's keep our listener in the hot seat. You've got your bakery. How do you systematically protect it without going bankrupt from buying too much insurance?
Well, you start with step 1. Identify and establish goals. And the very first thing a planner does is determine your tolerable loss amount. This is all about defining your financial threshold for pain.
The text uses a fascinating comparison here. It says you have to look at a $5,000 medical deductible and a $5,000 auto collision deductible side by side.
Because mathematically, $5,000 is $5,000. The emotional context doesn't matter to your bank account.
Yeah, money is money.
Exactly. A planner will sit down with you and say, if you cannot comfortably absorb a $5,000 out-of-pocket loss to fix your delivery van, you certainly cannot afford a $5,000 deductible if you end up in the hospital.
Wow. Yeah.
It forces you to establish a consistent baseline of what you can actually afford to lose across your entire life.
The second part of step 1 is identifying the general and specific risks based on your lifestyle. And the module makes a huge point about owning toys.
Yes, the toys category completely rewrites your risk profile. boats, airplanes, jet skis, high-performance motorcycles.
Right. If you buy a boat with your bakery profits, you aren't just taking on the risk of the boat sinking. You are taking on the massive liability hazard of someone getting chopped by the propeller while you're driving.
It applies to activities, too. Serving on the board of a local charity or even just being the parent who drives the carpool to soccer practice. Every single one of those introduces a specific liability exposure.
Which leads to the financial reality check of step 1, determining the income available for risk mitigation. And this number honestly floored me. The text states that the average family spends at least 10% of their gross income purely on risk protection. Home, auto, life, health.
It is a staggering figure. 10% of everything you earn just to build a defensive wall around the other 90%. And the text notes that without employer-subsidized health insurance, that percentage skyrockets.
Wait, really? Just 10% right off the top?
Yep, minimum.
That puts a huge spotlight on why you can't just wing this. I mean, if you are dedicating over 10% of your life's labor to a defensive strategy, you need a formal process. So step 2 is gather data. You pull your current policies, you do a fiscal inventory of your assets.
And that includes things you might not think of, like animals.
Dogs.
Right. The text specifically notes that a dog is both a piece of property that can be lost and a massive walking liability hazard if it bites a customer in your bakery. You also gather details on volunteer activities.
I found that interesting. Why does my financial planner need to know if I, serve soup at the shelter on Thanksgiving?
Because volunteer work is a massive hidden liability trap. If you are directing an activity at a charity event and someone gets injured, or if you sit on the board and the charity mismanages funds, you can be personally sued.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a planner needs to know if the organization's insurance actually covers you or if you are personally exposed.
Step 3 is analyze and evaluate, looking at tort law and contract law liability, which we are going to dive incredibly deep into later. Step 4 is develop a plan, and step 5 is communicate the recommendations. But step 6 is where the rubber meets the road. Implement.
And this is exactly where the entire process usually falls apart. The text has a great, very blunt line. Handing the client a nicely bound proposal does no good unless action is taken.
This gets deeply into the psychology of risk, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, contemplating your own destruction is inherently unpleasant.
Yeah, nobody wants to do that.
Exactly. A planner can build a mathematically perfect defensive strategy, but it requires the client to sit in a room and actively think about dying prematurely, becoming disabled, or getting sued into oblivion. Human beings don't like doing that. We freeze up. We experience paralysis by analysis.
Oh, I'll sign the life insurance papers next week. I'm too busy right now.
Exactly. So a massive part of a risk professional's job isn't just math, it's psychological facilitation. It's holding the client's hand, forcing the tough conversations, and ensuring the premiums are actually paid and the trust documents are actually signed.
And step 7 is monitor for changes because life isn't static. So that 7-step process is the engine. But what are the actual gears inside that engine? When we hit step 4, develop a plan, what are the specific strategies we use to protect the bakery?
The sources outline a risk management matrix built on 4 pillars. They are divided into 2 main categories: risk control and risk financing.
Let's start with risk control. The first pillar is avoidance.
Avoidance is the most absolute, nuclear option. It seeks to entirely eliminate the possibility of a loss by simply refusing to engage in the activity that creates the risk in the first place.
So for our bakery, if we are terrified that one of our delivery drivers is going to run over a pedestrian, the avoidance strategy is we just don't offer delivery, period.
Yes. The textbook uses the example of a business worried about vandals breaking windows. The avoidance strategy is to build a concrete bunker with absolutely no windows.
Right, which is 100% effective.
It is.
But it's also a terrible way to run a bakery. Nobody wants to buy a croissant in a windowless bunker, and refusing to deliver cuts our revenue in half.
Which is the problem with avoidance. It's perfectly safe, but often completely impractical or economically disastrous. So we move to the second pillar of risk control: reduction.
Reduction means we accept that the risk exists, like we are going to have windows, we are going to deliver bread, but we take aggressive steps to minimize the frequency or the severity of the loss.
Right. We have windows, but we install shatter-resistant glass and a security system. We offer delivery, but we run intense background checks on our drivers. We put speed limiters on the vans, and we install backup cameras. We are actively reducing the hazard.
But even with cameras, a crash could still happen. Which brings us to the risk financing category. How do we pay for the losses that sneak past our control measures? The third pillar is retention.
Retention is exactly what it sounds like. You retain the financial burden. If the loss happens, you just pay for it out of your own pocket.
Now, sometimes this happens by default, right?
Yeah.
If I just completely ignore a risk, I have technically retained it.
Yes. Passive retention is essentially ignorance. But active retention is a purposeful strategy. You decide that the cost of the potential loss is so small that it's easily covered by cash flow. If a baker drops a $5 bag of flour, you don't call an insurance company. You just sweep it up and retain the loss.
But the tech spends a huge amount of time distinguishing between basic retention, just paying out of pocket, and the concept of true self-insurance. I feel like business owners throw that term around a lot. Oh, we're self-insured.
They do, and they are usually using it incorrectly. Often when a mid-sized business says they are self-insured, what they really mean is, we decided not to buy an insurance policy and we are crossing our fingers that nothing catastrophic happens. That is not self-insurance.
Walk me through how true self-insurance actually works then.
True self-insurance is a highly structured, mathematically rigorous operation. It usually only applies to massive corporations, think Delta Airlines or Walmart. To truly self-insure, an organization must fundamentally act like a commercial insurance company internally. First, they need a massive number of homogeneous exposure units.
Meaning they have thousands of employees or thousands of vehicles, so the law of large numbers actually starts to work for them. They can accurately predict that out of 10,000 employees, exactly X number will need a specific medical procedure this year.
Exactly. Once they have that statistical predictability, they must pre-fund the expected losses. They can't just raid the corporate payroll account when someone gets hurt. They have to legally ring-fence adequate funds into a dedicated trust.
And on top of that, the text says they need administrative capability.
Because when an employee files a medical claim, someone has to process it. A true self-insured corporation has to hire teams of claims adjusters, medical reviewers, and lawyers to objectively determine if a claim is valid under their internal plan documents, disperse the payments, and fight fraudulent claims.
That sounds incredibly expensive.
It is an incredibly heavy administrative lift, which is why most businesses simply cannot do it.
Which naturally drives 99% of the population to the fourth and final pillar, transfer.
Transfer is the magic trick of modern economics. You pass the catastrophic financial burden of a risk to a third party.
Now, you can do this through contracts, right? Like having a customer sign a liability waiver before they take a cake decorating class at our bakery.
Yes, non-insurance transfer is common. You can also subcontract the delivery driving to a third-party logistics company, transferring the liability of the road to them. But the ultimate form of transfer is buying a commercial insurance policy.
Paying the premium.
Right. You pay a relatively small, known, predictable cost in exchange for a massive corporation taking on the burden of a deeply unpredictable, catastrophic cost.
To help us decide which of these four pillars to use, the sources provide a risk management matrix. It plots every risk on two axes: frequency, so how often it happens, and severity, how much it costs when it does. Let's plot the risks for a bakery. First quadrant: high frequency, high severity, it happens all the time, and it costs a fortune.
This is the death zone. If you have a risk that sits in this quadrant, your only viable strategy is avoidance and aggressive reduction.
Because no insurance company is going to let you transfer that to them. If you try to insure a building that burns down every 6 months, the premium would be higher than the value of the building itself.
Exactly. If a specific bakery product requires you to use highly unstable liquid nitrogen and it causes severe injuries weekly, you simply stop making that product. You avoid it entirely.
Second quadrant: high frequency, low severity. It happens constantly, but it's cheap to fix. Like minor dings on our delivery van, scratched paint.
The strategy here is retention and reduction. You put backup cameras on the vans to reduce the frequency, but ultimately, you just pay the body shop out of your cash flow as a normal cost of doing business.
But wait, why wouldn't I just buy an insurance policy with a $0 deductible to cover all those little scratches?
Because it is massively inefficient. If you buy insurance for high-frequency, low-severity events, the insurance company has to charge you for the expended cost of the scratches, plus the salary of the underwriter, the salary of the claims adjuster, the cost of their office building, and their corporate profit margin. You are effectively paying a middleman a premium to handle your own small change. Just retain it.
Which brings us to the third quadrant: low frequency, low severity. It rarely happens, and it's cheap.
Pure retention.
Looking at this matrix, this is where the light bulb goes off for me. Buying extended warranties on cheap consumer electronics or buying specific insurance for a low-severity, low-frequency event is mathematically absurd. It's like paying someone a monthly subscription fee to carry an umbrella for you every day on the off chance it rains in the Sahara Desert.
Yes.
You are wasting capital, just retain the risk.
That is a perfect analogy, and it clears the deck for the final quadrant, which is the exact scenario the insurance industry was invented for. Low frequency, high severity.
Like our bakery burning to the ground.
Yeah.
Or our delivery driver hitting a neurosurgeon in a crosswalk and facing a $10 million lawsuit.
Right. It is highly unlikely to happen on any given Tuesday. The frequency is very low. But if it does happen, the severity is an extinction-level event for your finances. The strategy here is transfer. This is where insurance shines. You pay the premium to transfer the catastrophic severity to a large pool.
Okay, so we've run our bakery through the triage blueprint. We've identified a low-frequency, high-severity risk, a massive fire, and we know we need to transfer it. To do that, we have to step into the marketplace. And that marketplace is populated by a complex web of intermediaries, the matchmakers of risk.
The textbook uses the umbrella term producers to cover all the individuals who sell insurance, but understanding exactly who these producers are, and crucially who they legally represent, is arguably the most dangerous trap for a consumer in this entire module.
Let's run through the cast of characters. We start with independent agents.
Independent agents represent multiple different insurance companies. They operate under the American agency system. If you go to an independent agent to insure your bakery, they can take your application and shop around to Company A, Company B, and Company C, trying to find the best rate and coverage for your specific operation.
Contrast that with captive agents.
Captive agents are contractually bound to one specific company or a group of companies under common ownership. They are direct writers. If you sit down with a captive agent, they can only offer you the menu from their specific company.
And the text notes that many captive agency contracts explicitly forbid the agent from placing your business with a competitor, even if the agent knows the competitor has a much better product for your bakery. That seems like a massive limitation the consumer needs to be aware of.
It absolutely is. The text also mentions career agents, who are typically captive agents in the life insurance sector, provided with massive corporate support in exchange for strict production quotas. And producing general agents, or PGAs, who primarily sell personally but might hire sub-agents.
But here is where we hit the absolute plot twist of this section. We have to talk about brokers. Because a broker is not an agent.
This is a vital legal distinction that 99% of the public does not understand. Everything we just discussed, independent, captive, career, those are agents. In the eyes of the law, an agent represents the insurance company. They are a legal extension of the principal insurer.
And a broker.
A broker legally represents you, the buyer.
Okay, I want to drill down on this. Because why does the average person care about this legal technicality? They both sell me a policy, they both take my money.
You care immensely when things go wrong and lawyers get involved. Let's say you use an agent. The agent makes a massive mistake on your application. They check the wrong box regarding the fire suppression system in your bakery. The bakery burns down, and the insurance company tries to deny the claim because of the incorrect application.
Okay.
Because the agent legally represents the company, the agent's mistake is the company's mistake. The insurance company is generally held liable and forced to pay the claim.
Because their own representative messed up.
Exactly. Now, flip the scenario. You use a broker. The broker makes the exact same mistake on the application. The insurer denies the claim. You try to sue the insurer. The judge will throw your case out.
Wait, really?
Yes, because the insurance company is not liable for the actions of a broker, because the broker represents you. Your own representative made the mistake. Your only recourse is to try to sue your broker for malpractice.
Wow. That distinction completely shifts the liability landscape. Speaking of specific brokers, what is a surplus line broker?
They serve a very unique function. Sometimes a risk is so bizarre or so massive that no standard state-admitted insurance company will touch it. Think about an offshore oil rig or a specialized satellite launch or, I don't know, insuring a celebrity singer's vocal cords.
Or a bakery that decides to specialize in deep frying incredibly dangerous, unstable ingredients.
Right. A surplus line broker has the specialized legal authority to bypass the standard state market and place your business with non-admitted insurers. Often massive syndicates like Lloyd's of London, who specialize in pricing these extreme risks.
Okay, this brings us to a concept that the text spends a huge amount of time on. Authority. Because an agent legally represents the massive insurance company, the principal. The agent wields terrifying power to legally bind that corporation to a contract.
The law of agency is clear.
Hmm.
The principal is legally bound by the acts of its agents, provided the agent is acting within the scope of their authority, and the law recognizes three distinct escalating types of authority: express, implied, and apparent.
Express authority makes perfect sense. It's written down in black and white.
Yes. The contract between the agent and the insurer explicitly states, you are authorized to sell commercial property policies up to $5 million in value. The boundaries are clear. Implied authority bridges the gap. It is the authority that isn't expressly written down, but is reasonably necessary to fulfill the express duties. For example, the contract authorizes the agent to sell life insurance. It might not explicitly say, you are authorized to collect the first premium check and issue a receipt.
Right.
But standard industry practice requires collecting a premium to start a policy. Therefore, the agent has the implied authority to accept that check, and the company is bound the moment the agent takes the money.
But it's the third type of parent authority that leads back to our terrifying opening hook.
The parent authority is a fascinating legal doctrine. It exists when a third party, so the client, is reasonably led to believe that the agent has the authority to act, based on the actions or the inaction of the principal.
Let's expand on the story from the beginning. The insurance company fires their top commercial agent. The employment contract is shredded. Express authority is gone. Implied authority is gone.
But the insurance company is sloppy. They don't confiscate the agent's rate books. They don't shut down their access to the policy illustration software. They leave the official corporate business cards on the desk. And most importantly, they fail to send a letter to the agent's existing clients notifying them of the termination.
So the furious fired agent takes those official business cards, boots up the official software on their laptop, walks into our listener's bakery, and writes a $10 million liability policy, collecting a premium check.
From the bakery owner's perspective, this person looks exactly like an authorized agent. They have the cards, the software, the history. The client has absolutely no reason to suspect otherwise. If the bakery burns down the next day, the insurance company will argue, we fired that person. They had no authority.
And what will the judge say?
The judge will say, you allowed the appearance of authority to persist. You failed to notify the public. Therefore, under apparent authority, you are legally bound to honor that $10 million policy. The burden is entirely on the principal to dismantle the illusion of authority.
That is incredible. The insurer's on the hook for millions because they didn't send an email. The text also introduces the concept of ratification, which is sort of the reverse of this scenario.
Ratification is when an agent completely oversteps their bounds, but the company decides they like the money anyway. Let's say an active agent has a contract that expressly forbids them from writing insurance on commercial trucking fleets. The company hates that risk. The agent has zero authority to do it.
But the agent finds a massive trucking company, writes a wildly unauthorized policy, and sends the application along with the $500,000 premium check to the home office.
The underwriter at the home office looks at the application, knows the agent wasn't allowed to write it, but looks at that massive check and thinks, we've had a slow quarter, let's take the risk. They cash the check and issue the policy.
They just ratified the contract.
Yeah, exactly. By accepting the benefits of the unauthorized act with full knowledge of the facts, the insurer retroactively grants authority and modifies the agency agreement. They can't later try to deny a claim by saying the agent wasn't authorized. They cash the check.
It's the legal equivalent of no takesies backsies. And the final point in this section is a crucial consumer protection. Knowledge of the agent is legally imputed to the insurer.
This is vital. Let's say you apply for life insurance. You sit across from the agent and honestly tell them, I was diagnosed with a minor heart flutter 3 years ago. The agent, wanting to get the policy approved quickly so they get their commission, deliberately leaves that off the application.
So they submit a clean, fake application to the company.
Yes. 5 years later, you die of a heart attack. The insurance company investigates, finds the medical records, and says, we are denying the claim because you didn't tell us about the heart flutter.
But I told the agent.
And under the law, the agent's knowledge is the company's knowledge. If you can prove you told the agent, the law assumes the massive corporation knew it too. They cannot deny the claim based on their own agent's deceit.
Because these agents wield so much legal power, and because the insurance industry sits on trillions of dollars holding up the entire global economy, someone has to be watching the watchers. How is this gigantic industry actually regulated?
The text notes that regulation is essential for three reasons: to maintain fair competition, to prevent abuse of consumers in these complex contracts, and above all, to minimize market failures.
Because if a massive property insurer goes bankrupt the day after a Category 5 hurricane hits Florida, the economic fallout is catastrophic. People can't rebuild, banks lose their mortgage collateral, the regional economy stops. Solvency is everything.
Exactly. But the fascinating part is who does the regulating. Historically and currently, the insurance industry is heavily regulated at the state level, not the federal level. You have 50 different state insurance commissioners running 50 different fiefdoms.
Which seems completely counterintuitive for massive multinational corporations. Why isn't there a federal Department of Insurance?
To understand that, we have to look at an incredible legal tug-of-war that spans over a century. It starts in 1868 with a Supreme Court case called Paul v. Virginia.
1868, just after the Civil War.
Right. In that case, the Supreme Court ruled that issuing a policy of insurance is not a transaction of commerce. It's just a local contract. Therefore, under the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution, the federal government had absolutely no jurisdiction. Insurance had to be regulated by the individual states.
Okay, so the states build up their regulatory departments.
Mhm.
They start collecting massive premium taxes, and they run the show.
For nearly 80 years, that was the law of the land. But then, in 1944, a massive case reaches the Supreme Court, U.S. v. Southeastern Underwriters Association. The federal government accused a massive cartel of insurance companies of blatantly colluding to fix prices and monopolize the market, violating federal antitrust laws.
But wait, if insurance isn't interstate commerce, federal antitrust laws don't apply.
Exactly. That was the insurance company's defense. But the Supreme Court looked at the modern reality of insurance money flowing across state lines, massive national pools, and they reversed their 1868 decision. In 1944, the court ruled that insurance absolutely is interstate commerce and is fully subject to federal regulation and antitrust laws.
So overnight, the federal government is handed the keys to the entire industry.
And absolute panic ensued. The state regulators were terrified of losing their power and their massive tax revenues. The insurance companies were terrified of suddenly facing federal prosecution for how they had been operating for decades.
So what happened?
The lobbying machine went into overdrive. And the very next year, 1945, Congress enacted Public Law 15, known as the McCarran-Ferguson Act.
And let me make sure I'm following the absurdity of this. The Supreme Court tells the federal government, you are in charge of this trillion-dollar industry. And Congress immediately passes a law saying, no thanks, we don't want it, give it back to the states. Why would they voluntarily give up that power?
Because creating a massive, functional federal regulatory bureaucracy from scratch to oversee millions of complex contracts in 1945 while trying to manage the end of World War II were seen as a logistical nightmare. The state infrastructure was already built.
So McCarran-Ferguson handed the authority right back.
With a massive caveat.
Yeah.
The act declared that continued state regulation was in the public interest. It exempted the insurance industry from most federal antitrust laws, provided that the states adequately regulated those areas themselves. Congress basically said, you can keep your power, states, but if you do a bad job, we will step back in. The federal government only reserved direct authority over things like fair labor standards.
Okay, but if we have 50 different states making their own rules, how is there any consistency? Why doesn't an insurance company in New York operate on fundamentally different mathematical principles than one in Texas? It seems like it would be chaos for a national carrier.
That is where the NAIC comes in, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. It is an organization composed of the top regulators from all 50 states.
But the text is very clear. The NAIC has absolutely zero legal authority. They cannot pass a law. They cannot force Texas to do anything.
That's right. They are essentially an advisory body, a think tank. They debate best practices, analyze financial models, and draft model laws. They then recommend that all 50 state legislatures independently pass these identical model laws to create national uniformity.
But if they have no power, how do they get fiercely independent states to actually agree to pass these massive, complex model laws?
Through the brilliant use of peer pressure and their accreditation program.
How does that work?
The NAIC sets a strict baseline of financial solvency oversight. If a state adopts the NAIC's core model laws and proves they are aggressively monitoring their local companies, the NAIC certifies that state's insurance department as accredited.
Why does a state care about a gold star from an advisory board?
Because of reciprocity. If State A is accredited, State B will accept State A's financial examinations of the insurance companies headquartered there. But if a state refuses to pass the model laws and loses its accreditation, suddenly every other state where that company does business refuses to trust the home state's math.
Oh, wow. So if my bakery's insurance company is headquartered in a state that loses accreditation, suddenly regulators from 49 other states might demand to individually audit my insurance company.
Yes. It would cause regulatory chaos, massive expense, and potentially paralyze the insurance companies domiciled in that unaccredited state. So, the massive insurance companies themselves aggressively lobby their own state legislatures to pass the NAIC model laws just to maintain the accreditation. It is a quasi-national unifying force powered entirely by peer pressure and corporate self-preservation.
That is a fascinating workaround. So under this watchful eye of state regulators, the actual product you buy is created, the insurance contract. And the reading makes abundantly clear that these are not your typical business agreements. The DNA of an insurance contract is totally unique.
They operate on contractual concepts that are foreign to standard commercial law. Let's start with the fact that they are aleatory contracts.
Aleatory. It means an unequal exchange of dollars, dependent on chance.
Think about a normal contract. You hire a contractor to remodel your bakery kitchen for $20,000. You hand them $20,000 and they give you $20,000 worth of ovens, tile, and labor. The value exchanged is basically equal.
But insurance is fundamentally unequal.
Exactly. You pay a $2,000 premium for a $1 million liability policy. If you don't have any claims that year, the insurance company keeps your $2,000 and gives you absolutely nothing tangible in return.
I lose $2,000, they gain $2,000.
But if your delivery driver hits someone the next day, the insurance company might pay out $1 million. You paid $2,000, they paid $1 million. It is a massive, unequal exchange of dollars, entirely dependent on a chance event occurring.
The next characteristic is that insurance policies are contracts of adhesion, which means take it or leave it.
The insurance company's army of lawyers drafts the contract. The consumer has zero ability to negotiate the terms, the definitions, or the exclusions. You don't sit down with the underwriter and redline the policy language. You either accept it exactly as written or you go find another company.
Let me push back on this because that sounds like borderline extortion. If a massive corporation with infinite legal resources writes a 100-page contract filled with dense jargon and I have no power to change a single comma, how is that legally fair? They could hide anything in there.
The courts actually agree with you. They recognize this massive imbalance of power. Because you, the consumer, had no hand in drafting the language, the courts have established a strict rule. Any ambiguity in the contract is interpreted entirely in favor of the insured party.
So if there's a confusing sentence, that could be read two ways.
The court will adopt the reading that benefits you and penalize the insurance company. If the insurer drafted a sloppy, ambiguous exclusion to try and avoid paying a claim, the court will force them to pay it. The drafter bears the absolute burden of clarity.
That is a crucial protection. Next, they are conditional contracts. The payout depends on a covered loss happening, but also on the insured meeting specific conditions, like paying the premium on time and notifying the company promptly after a loss.
And perhaps the most foundational characteristic is the principle of indemnity. We touched on this with pure risk. The legal purpose of the contract is to restore the insured to the exact financial position they were in right before the loss occurred.
To make them whole, but not a penny richer.
Exactly. You cannot profit from a loss. If your $30,000 delivery van is totaled, the insurance company will pay you the actual cash value, $30,000. They will not pay you $60,000 so you can buy 2 new vans. If people could profit from insurance, it would create a massive moral hazard. You'd have bakery owners intentionally crashing their vans to upgrade their fleet.
But the reading outlines a really fascinating scenario where the concept of indemnity hits a legal wall involving the collateral source rule and subrogation. Walk me through how this actually works step by step.
Let's build the scenario. Your bakery delivery driver is at a red light. Another driver, who is texting, completely totals your van. Under the collateral source rule in tort law, the at-fault driver who is texting is legally obligated to pay for your $30,000 van. And crucially, they don't get a discount just because you happen to be responsible and have your own commercial auto insurance.
Okay, so the bad driver owes me $30,000, but I have a business to run. I can't wait 2 years for a lawsuit to settle to buy a new van, so I call my own insurance company.
Yes. Your insurance company honors their contract and immediately writes you a check for $30,000 so you can replace the van today. You are made whole.
But wait, If my insurance paid me $30,000 and the bad driver is still legally obligated to pay me $30,000, if I collect from both, I've just made $60,000 on a $30,000 van. I profited. That violates indemnity.
Precisely. To prevent you from double dipping, your insurance contract includes a subrogation clause. This is a legal maneuver where your insurance company effectively steps into your shoes.
So after they pay me, they take over my legal rights.
Yes, they pay you the $30,000.
Yeah.
Then their lawyers turn around and sue the texting driver or the texting driver's insurance company in your name. They fight the legal battle in the background to recover the $30,000 they just paid you.
That is brilliant. It gets me my van immediately. It holds the guilty party financially accountable so they don't get off scot-free, and it prevents me from profiting.
And it replenishes the insurance company's pool of funds, keeping premiums lower for everyone. It is an elegant legal ecosystem. The text also notes that insurance policies are personal contracts.
Meaning they're tied to the individual person, not the physical property.
Right. You don't insure a bakery building, you insure your specific financial interest in that building. If you sell the bakery to someone else, you cannot simply hand them your insurance policy. The underwriters evaluated your credit score, your claims history, your experience. The new buyer has to apply for their own policy based on their own risk profile.
And finally, they are unilateral contracts.
In a standard bilateral contract, both parties make legally enforceable promises. I promise to paint your house. You promise to pay me $5,000. If you don't pay, I can sue you. But an insurance contract is unilateral. Only one party makes a legally enforceable promise.
The insurance company.
Exactly. The insurance company makes a legally binding promise to pay covered claims. You, the policyholder, make no legally binding promise to pay the premiums.
Wait, really?
Yes. You can stop paying your premium tomorrow, and the insurance company cannot sue you for breach of contract. Their only legal recourse is to cancel the policy going forward. They cannot force you to keep paying.
Because these contracts are so imbalanced and unique, the module highlights a supercharged version of honesty required to make them function. The doctrine of utmost good faith.
In a normal commercial transaction, the guiding principle is often caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. If you buy a used oven for the bakery, it is your job to inspect it. But in insurance, the massive corporation cannot possibly investigate every detail of every applicant's life, health, and business before issuing a policy.
If they had to send a private investigator to audit my bakery every time I applied for a policy, the premiums would be $1 million a year.
Exactly. The system relies entirely on the applicant telling the truth. Both parties must operate with utmost good faith. If that faith is broken, the insurance company has specific legal grounds to completely rescind the contract. The text outlines 3 main breaches: misrepresentation, concealment, and warranties.
Let's start with misrepresentation.
This is an active false statement made by the applicant that induces the company to issue the contract. Crucially, the lie must be material.
Meaning, if the underwriter had known the actual truth, they would have either refused to issue the policy or charged a significantly higher premium.
Right. If you tell the insurance company your bakery is built out of fire-resistant brick, but it's actually highly flammable wood frame, that is a material misrepresentation. If it burns down, they will deny the claim. But if you lied and said the walls in the employee bathroom were painted blue and they are actually green, that's immaterial. It doesn't change the risk of fire. They still have to pay the claim.
Concealment is the second breach. This isn't an active lie. It's intentionally withholding material information.
Silence can be just as deceptive. If you apply for a massive life insurance policy and you intentionally fail to mention that you were diagnosed with terminal cancer the week before, you have concealed a material fact. When you die a month later, the insurer will investigate, discover the records, and void the policy.
But the third breach, warranties, seems incredibly draconian. The text says a warranty requires the strict application of truth.
A warranty is a statement that becomes a physical, written condition of the contract itself. It is an absolute guarantee that a certain condition will be strictly maintained. If a warranty is breached, even for a completely innocent mistake, and even if the breach had absolutely nothing to do with the loss, the courts historically allowed the insurer to completely walk away from the contract.
Let's apply this to the bakery. I get a discount on my premium by warranting that I will have an armed security guard on the premises 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Okay. And let's say at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, your security guard gets food poisoning and steps outside to the alley for exactly 10 minutes to throw up. During those 10 minutes, an electrical short starts a massive fire that burns the bakery to the ground.
The guard throwing up in the alley didn't cause the electrical fire. They couldn't have stopped it anyway.
Doesn't matter. Under a strict interpretation of a warranty, the condition 24/7 guard presence was technically broken. The insurance company can deny your multi-million-dollar fire claim because the warranty was breached. Because this is so severe, modern courts often try to interpret these clauses as representations rather than strict warranties to protect consumers from minor technicalities, unless the language is explicitly absolute.
We also need to touch on the basic elements required for any contract to be enforceable. Offer and acceptance, consideration.
Consideration is the value exchanged. You pay the premium, they provide the promise.
Legal object. I can't buy an insurance policy to protect my underground illegal gambling ring.
Because the underlying activity is illegal, the contract is void from inception.
And competent parties. You can't be intoxicated, mentally incapacitated, or underage. This leads to a fascinating legal distinction between a contract being void versus voidable.
A void contract simply does not exist. The gambling ring insurance is void. But a voidable contract is a valid contract where one party holds a special legal eject button.
The text uses the example of a 14-year-old. Say a 14-year-old child actor makes $1 million and signs a contract to buy a massive life insurance policy.
A minor is not legally competent. However, contract law seeks to protect the incompetent party. The contract is valid, but it is voidable strictly at the option of the minor. The 14-year-old can decide to back out, cancel the policy, and demand their premiums back.
But the massive insurance company, the competent adult in the room, cannot cancel it.
Exactly. The company is strictly bound. They can't decide a year later, wait, we sold this to a kid, let's cancel it. The power to void rests entirely with the protected party.
We buy these meticulously defined contracts with all their conditional DNA to protect our assets. But if we are being honest, for a business owner, the main reason we buy them is to protect ourselves from being sued, which plunges us directly into the world of legal liability, and specifically, the law of torts.
When things go horribly wrong and someone is injured, the law of torts is the machinery that decides who writes the check. A tort is a civil wrong that causes physical, emotional, or financial harm to another person, and the person who commits the tort is called the tortfeasor.
Torts can be intentional, like I purposely punched someone in my bakery, but the text focuses heavily on unintentional torts, which generally fall under the umbrella of negligence.
Negligence is the foundation of almost all liability lawsuits. And it is not just a general feeling of you were careless. To successfully prove negligence in court, a plaintiff's lawyer must establish 4 very specific sequential elements. If even one element is missing, the lawsuit fails.
Let's walk our bakery delivery driver through these 4 elements. Element 1, a duty is owed.
We all owe a general duty of care to society to act as a reasonably prudent person would. When your driver gets behind the wheel of the delivery van, they owe a legal duty to every other driver and pedestrian to operate that massive piece of metal safely and follow traffic laws.
Element 2, the duty was breached.
Your driver failed to act as a reasonably prudent person. They decided to look down at their phone to read a text message instead of watching the road.
Element 3, actual damages.
A breach isn't enough on its own. If your driver texts and runs a red light but miraculously doesn't hit anyone, they might get a traffic ticket from a cop, but a random pedestrian can't sue them for negligence because no one was actually hurt. There must be quantifiable physical or financial damage. In our scenario, the driver rear-ends a sedan, crushing the bumper and causing the driver severe whiplash and medical bills.
And finally, element 4, proximate cause.
This is the critical connective tissue. There must be an unbroken chain of events linking the breach of duty directly to the damages. The sedan driver has whiplash because your driver was texting and didn't hit the brakes. The negligence is the proximate cause of the loss.
If all 4 are proven, you are liable for negligence. But the module also outlines some very specific, highly dangerous variations of liability. Let's talk about attractive nuisance.
This is a terrifying concept for property owners. Normally, under the law, you owe almost zero duty of care to a trespasser. If an adult breaks into your closed bakery at 2 a.m. and trips on a mop bucket, they generally cannot sue you.
But an attractive nuisance changes that completely.
It does. An attractive nuisance is something on your property that is artificially created, highly dangerous, and naturally alluring to children. The classic residential example is a swimming pool. For your bakery, maybe it's a massive, colorful outdoor climbing structure you built to attract families.
Children do not understand the legal concept of trespassing. nor do they understand the physical risk of the climbing structure.
Exactly. The law states that property owners must use a very high degree of care to anticipate if children might be drawn to the property, and they must take active steps to prevent harm like installing a locked, impenetrable fence. If you fail to do that and a trespassing child wanders onto your property and gets injured, you are highly likely to be held liable, despite the fact that they were trespassing.
Then there is negligence per se. This sounds like a legal shortcut.
It is the ultimate shortcut for a plaintiff's lawyer. If a legislature has enacted a specific statute explicitly designed to protect a certain class of people from a specific type of harm, and you violate that statute, the lawyer doesn't need to argue about reasonably prudent persons or analyze the four elements. The violation of the statute is the negligence.
The textbook example is speeding in a school zone.
The speed limit in a school zone is a law specifically designed to protect school children from being hit by cars. If your delivery driver speeds through a school zone and hits a child, they violated the exact statute and caused the exact harm it was designed to prevent. They are guilty of negligence per se. The only thing left for the jury to decide is how many millions of dollars you owe.
It gets even stricter with absolute or strict liability.
In cases of strict liability, fault is completely irrelevant. You don't have to prove negligence at all. The underlying activity is considered so inherently dangerous to society that if someone gets hurt, you are paying for it, regardless of how insanely careful you were.
Keeping wild animals as pets, or a demolition company using dynamite in a city.
Exactly. You could hire the greatest engineers on Earth to manage the dynamite. You could have a perfect safety record. But if a window shatters a mile away from the shockwave and cuts someone, you are strictly liable.
And then there's the concept that directly attacks a bakery owner, vicarious liability.
Vicarious liability is when you are held legally and financially responsible for the actions of another person. The text notes this applies to parents being liable for the vandalism of their children, but it is the absolute cornerstone of commercial liability. Employers are vicariously liable for their employees.
So my driver hits the sedan because they were texting. The injured driver doesn't just sue the driver. They sue me, the bakery owner.
Absolutely. The legal doctrine is respondeat superior, let the master answer. If the employee was acting within the scope of their employment, delivering your bread, you, the business owner, are vicariously liable for the destruction they cause.
Even if I physically took their phone away, train them perfectly, and have a zero-tolerance policy for distracted driving.
Yes. The text makes a profound, unsettling point here. Liability and fault are not synonymous. You, the bakery owner, can be completely without moral or operational fault and still face absolute vicarious liability that bankrupts your business. That is the exact mechanism that makes liability insurance the most critical piece of paper a business owner buys.
But if we are sued for negligence, we aren't just sitting ducks. The law provides specific shields, ways to contest liability in court.
And understanding these defenses is crucial, not just for courtroom drama, but because insurance adjusters use these exact legal doctrines every single day to aggressively negotiate down the value of claims before they ever see a judge. The first defense is assumption of the risk.
This basically means you knew this was a terrible idea, but you did it anyway.
Exactly. If you decide to go horseback riding and the horse gets spooked by a snake and bucks you off, breaking your arm, you generally cannot sue the stable owner for negligence. You voluntarily engaged in an activity with a known, inherent, unavoidable danger. You assumed the risk.
But the real battlegrounds in tort law are around contributory and comparative negligence. I want to spend some time here because contributory negligence seems mathematically insane.
It is the strictest, most brutal legal doctrine in tort law. Under contributory negligence, if the injured party, the plaintiff, contributed to their own injury in any way, even 1%, they are completely and entirely barred from recovering any damages from the defendant.
Let's use the textbook example. Matthew is driving down the highway. He is going 5 miles over the speed limit. Another driver, completely intoxicated, violently swerves across 3 lanes and obliterates Matthew's car.
The case goes to court. The jury looks at the facts and decides the drunk driver was 99% at fault for the catastrophic crash. But because Matthew was technically speeding, the jury determines he was 1% at fault for the ultimate severity of his own injuries.
And under contributory negligence, because he was 1% at fault, Matthew gets absolutely nothing. $0. The drunk driver pays nothing.
Correct. The claim is completely dismissed.
I have to push back on this. That is an absurd, cold-blooded legal standard. How does any justice system justify letting a 99% guilty party walk away financially free just because the victim wasn't absolutely perfect?
You are echoing the exact outrage that caused almost every state in the country to abandon it. But to understand why it existed, you have to look at 18th and 19th century legal philosophy. The courts believed that they should not be in the business of parsing out degrees of fault. The logic was, if you come to the court asking for relief, your hands must be perfectly clean. If you participated in your own destruction, the court will not help you.
It's just a brutal all-or-nothing system.
Which is why the vast majority of modern states have replaced it with comparative negligence.
How does comparative work?
It is infinitely more equitable. Under comparative negligence, the court determines the total dollar amount of the damages and then assigns a percentage of fault to both parties. The defendant's financial liability is simply reduced by the plaintiff's percentage of fault.
So back to Matthew.
Matthew's hospital bills and car replacement total $100,000. The court says he was 10% at fault for speeding, and the drunk driver was 90% at fault. Matthew's $100,000 award is reduced by his 10% fault. He recovers $90,000.
That makes so much more sense. The text also mentions a bizarre loophole to the harsh contributory negligence rule called last clear chance.
This was the court's early attempt to soften the brutality of contributory negligence before comparative negligence was invented. It says that even if the plaintiff was partly at fault, say, a pedestrian carelessly jaywalks across a busy street without looking, they would normally be barred from recovering. That, if the defendant driver saw the jaywalker, had plenty of time, distance, and a clear chance to hit the brakes and avoid the accident, but chose not to, the pedestrian can still sue. The person with the final, last, clear chance to prevent the tragedy bears the ultimate legal responsibility.
You mentioned earlier that insurance adjusters use these defenses. How does that actually play out in reality?
Let's say your delivery van driver hits a pedestrian. The pedestrian files a $50,000 claim against your commercial liability policy. The insurance adjuster's job is to protect the company's assets. They will immediately investigate and look for comparative negligence.
They will try to find a way to blame the pedestrian.
Exactly. The adjuster will call the pedestrian's lawyer and say, yes, our driver hit your client, but we have video showing your client was looking at their phone and stepped off the curb 2 seconds early. We believe a jury will find your client 40% at fault, so we are only offering to pay $30,000. They use the legal doctrine of comparative negligence as a weapon to negotiate a massive discount on the settlement without ever stepping foot in a courtroom.
Speaking of adjusters, that brings us to the operational heart of the massive insurance corporation. Behind the curtain, how do they decide who gets into the pool and how do they process the chaos when a claim is filed?
It all begins with the underwriters. The textbook refers to them as the gatekeepers.
I picture them as the massive bouncers at the VIP nightclub of insurance. They are standing at the velvet rope, staring at the line of people, trying to figure out who is going to come in and start a massive bar fight, or in this case, file a catastrophic claim.
That is exactly what they do. An insurance company expects to pay claims. That is their actual product. But they rely entirely on the law of large numbers, which requires a predictable average baseline of risk. If the nightclub gets flooded with people who are statistically guaranteed to start a fight, the mathematical model breaks.
And the industry term for that existential threat is adverse selection.
Adverse selection is the tendency of individuals who know they have a higher than average risk to aggressively seek out insurance at standard rates.
If my bakery is located next to an illegal fireworks factory, I am going to buy the absolute maximum fire insurance coverage available today.
Exactly. If the underwriter fails at their job and lets you and 100 other high-risk bakeries into the standard pool, the company pays out massively more in fire claims than they projected. To survive, they have to raise premiums for everyone in the pool.
And what happens when premiums go up?
The safest, lowest risk bakeries look at the new premium and say, this is absurd. I've never had a fire. I'm not paying this. So the safe people cancel their policies and leave the pool.
Leaving an even higher concentration of dangerous bakeries behind.
Which means the company suffers even worse losses and has to raise premiums again, causing more safe people to leave. It is an economic phenomenon known as the death spiral, and it will bankrupt a multi-billion-dollar insurer in a few years. The underwriter's sole purpose is to ruthlessly filter out adverse selection and ensure the pool remains perfectly balanced.
Part of that filtering process is trying to identify human hazards before they issue a policy. The text points out a very important distinction between two types of human hazards, moral hazard and morale hazard. They sound identical, but they require totally different underwriting strategies.
A moral hazard involves an active, unethical, or strictly illegal behavior designed specifically to induce the payment of a claim. It is premeditated fraud.
The classic example. My bakery is failing. I'm deep in debt, so I intentionally pour gasoline on the floor and burn it down to collect the $2 million policy.
Arson for profit. Or a medical clinic submitting bills for surgeries they never performed. It's a fundamental moral failing. A morale hazard, on the other hand, isn't malicious. It is an attitude of profound indifference.
Like leaving my delivery van unlocked with the keys sitting on the dashboard, parked in a terrible neighborhood, simply because I know I have excellent comprehensive auto insurance.
Exactly. You didn't steal the van, you didn't pay someone to steal the van, but your sheer indifference to the loss, and indifference created by the very existence of the insurance policy, drastically increased the hazard. Underwriters combat morale hazard by forcing you to have skin in the game.
Deductibles.
Yes. If the underwriter mandates a $2,000 deductible on the van, you know you are paying the first $2,000 out of pocket if it gets stolen. Suddenly, you care again. You remember to lock the doors and take the keys.
When underwriting life and health insurance, the gatekeepers focus heavily on two specific statistical tables: mortality and morbidity.
Mortality refers strictly to death rates. Life insurance actuaries use massive, constantly updated mortality tables to predict exactly what fraction of a specific demographic group will die in a given year based on age, gender, tobacco use, and medical history.
It's incredibly macabre predicting exactly how many 45-year-old men will die this year, but it's pure mathematics.
It has to be. Morbidity, however, refers to the incidence of severe illness, injury, or disability. Health insurance and disability income insurance rely entirely on morbidity tables.
And the text gives a great test tip here that highlights the difference. Let's say an individual applies for insurance. They have a severe, chronic lower back problem. They've had 3 surgeries.
That individual could likely easily qualify for a life insurance policy at standard or even preferred rates. Because a bad back, while painful, doesn't significantly impact their mortality. It's not going to kill them prematurely.
But if that exact same person applies for a disability income policy,
They will likely be instantly declined or have the back completely excluded from coverage. Because their morbidity risk, the mathematical probability of them being physically unable to work and filing a massive claim is astronomically high. Different policies underwrite for fundamentally different risks.
so the underwriter does their job. You are allowed into the VIP club, you pay your premium, and then the worst happens. The peril strikes. A massive storm rips the roof off the bakery. Now we enter the loss adjustment process. And the text makes it clear this isn't just call an 800 number and wait for a check. You, the insured, have strict legal duties.
First and foremost is the notice of loss. You must notify the insurance company promptly. If your roof is ripped off in June and you wait until December to report it, the insurer cannot properly investigate the scene. They will likely deny the claim based on late notice.
You also have a strict duty for the protection of property. I can't just stand on the sidewalk, watch the rain pour through my missing roof onto my expensive industrial ovens, and expect the insurance company to buy me new ovens.
No. You are legally required to take reasonable, immediate steps to prevent further damage. You have to hire someone to put a massive tarp over the hole. The insurance company will reimburse you for the cost of the tarp and the labor, but they will actively refuse to pay for the water damage to the ovens that occurred because you failed to protect the property after the initial storm damage.
You also have to provide a detailed inventory, show the damaged property to the adjuster, submit formal, sworn proofs of loss, and cooperate fully with the investigation.
Which is completely managed by the claims adjuster. The adjuster is the boots on the ground for the insurance company. Their job is to investigate the physical facts, interpret the complex policy language to see if the peril is actually covered, demand proof of the value of the items, and ultimately make the decision to pay or deny the claim.
And if they decide to pay, the contract gives the massive corporation several unique options for settling claims. They don't always just write a check.
They have options to protect their bottom line. They can choose to replace the property. If your $20,000 dough mixer is destroyed, instead of giving you $20,000 cash, the insurer might use their massive commercial leverage to buy an identical replacement mixer wholesale for $15,000 and deliver it to your loading dock. You are indemnified, you have your mixer, but they saved $5,000.
There's also abandonment and salvage.
Let's go back to the total delivery van. The adjuster declares it a total loss and writes you a check for the $30,000 actual cash value. But you do not get to keep the crushed van.
Because if I kept it and sold it for scrap, I'd profit.
Exactly. So the insurer takes legal title and ownership of the wreck, the salvage. They will then auction that wreck to a scrapyard for $3,000 to recoup a tiny portion of the money they just paid you, slightly reducing their overall catastrophic loss.
The most interesting settlement option to me was the pair or set option.
This usually applies to fine art or jewelry, but the logic is fascinating. Imagine you own a perfectly matched pair of diamond earrings, appraised at $20,000 for the set. You lose one earring down the drain.
The remaining single earring isn't worth $10,000. Because the set is broken, the single earring might only appraise for $4,000 on the open market. I didn't lose 50% of the value, I lost 80% of the value.
Exactly. The insurer has several options. They can attempt to repair or replace the lost earring to perfectly restore the set, or they can pay you the difference between the value of the property right before the loss, $20,000, and the value right after the loss, $4,000.
So they would just cut me a check for $16,000.
Yes. They do not have to buy you a brand new $20,000 pair and let you keep the remaining original earring. It always comes strictly back to the principle of indemnity, restoring you to the exact financial baseline, no more, no less.
Which brings us to the final practical piece of the puzzle. We know how the legal sausage is made. We know about agents, apparent authority, strict liability, and subrogation. If I am the bakery owner, how do I actually select a company and a professional to guide me through this minefield?
The final step in the module is selecting producers and companies. Let's start with the human being across the desk from you, the agent or broker. The text emphasizes looking beyond a basic license.
Anyone can cram for 2 weeks and pass a state licensing exam.
True professionals seek out rigorous, specialized designations. The text lists several to hunt for. If you are dealing with property and casualty like insuring the bakery building, you look for a CPCU, the Chartered Property and Casualty Underwriter.
And for life insurance,
You look for a CLU, the Chartered Life Underwriter. These designations require passing up to 10 rigorous graduate-level exams over several years. It proves they aren't just salespeople, they are deeply knowledgeable technicians.
but even the smartest, most ethical CPCU broker on earth is entirely useless to me if the massive insurance company they place my bakery policy with goes bankrupt 2 days after a catastrophic fire. How do I evaluate a multi-billion-dollar corporation?
You rely on independent rating services. These are massive analytical firms that do nothing but forensically audit the financial health, investment portfolios, and claims-paying ability of insurance companies.
The grandfather of them all is AM Best.
AM Best is the gold standard because they specialize only in the insurance industry. They rate thousands of companies based on incredibly deep dives into their reserve funds and confidential interviews with executive management.
There are others mentioned too. Demotech specializes specifically in property and casualty insurers. And then you have the massive Wall Street names, Fitch, Moody's, and Standard & Poor's.
Those firms rate all kinds of global corporate debt, but they also provide specific, highly respected financial strength ratings for insurers. And the text mentions the street ratings, which operates on a slightly different model by heavily utilizing publicly available data.
The expert advice the module gives here is critical. Never, ever rely on just one single rating agency.
It is vital to cross-reference. Rating agencies can have blind spots. If AM Best gives a company an A+ rating, but Standard & Poor's suddenly downgrades them to a BBB, that discrepancy is a massive, screaming red flag. It means one agency sees a structural weakness the other missed. You also want your broker to check if the company has been placed on the NAIC watch list for troubled financial metrics.
The module also makes a really interesting point about the forms of ownership of the insurance company itself. They generally fall into two broad categories: stock companies and mutual companies.
A stock company is structurally identical to Apple or Ford. They are owned by external stockholders and they operate for one primary purpose: to earn a profit and pay dividends to those investors.
A mutual company, however, is a completely different beast. It is actually owned by the policyholders themselves.
Yes, if you buy a policy from a mutual company, you effectively become a partial owner of the corporation.
I always assumed stock companies were safer because they are massive corporate entities with access to Wall Street capital if they get into trouble. But a mutual company literally answers to the people holding the policies. That is a fascinating alignment of interests.
It completely changes the financial mechanics. If a mutual company collects significantly more in premiums than it ends up needing to pay claims and administrative expenses for the year, they do not have external Wall Street investors demanding those profits.
So what do they do with the massive surplus?
They return it to you owners, the policyholders, in the form of a non-taxable dividend. It effectively acts as a refund of an overcharge, lowering your net cost of the insurance for that year.
But the text is very careful to say that neither form is inherently better or guaranteed to be more secure than the other.
Absolutely not. A brilliantly managed, highly capitalized stock company is infinitely safer than a poorly run, over-leveraged mutual company, and vice versa. You still have to rely entirely on the independent rating agencies to evaluate their actual balance sheets.
Okay, we have covered an immense, almost overwhelming amount of ground today. We've done from defining a simple hazard cleaning the flour dust out of the bakery vents to understanding how a fired agent wields the terrifying power of apparent authority.
We have decoded the unique, imbalanced DNA of insurance policies as unilateral contracts of adhesion, and we've mapped out exactly how the brutal math of contributory negligence and tort law either defends you or destroys you.
The next time you click Accept on a massive digital insurance policy, or the next time you let a neighbor's kid play in your backyard, you now know the invisible legal and financial machinery turning in the background. You are no longer just hoping for the best. You actually understand the blueprint of risk.
And if we extrapolate the fundamental logic of everything we just discussed into the future, I want to leave the listener with a final thought to ponder. We spent a lot of time talking about adverse selection, the massive threat that people who know they are high risk will flood the pool, and how underwriters act as gatekeepers to maintain statistical averages.
Right. They use mortality tables to guess your risk because they cannot possibly know your exact individual future.
But look at the smartwatch on your wrist right now. Look at the rise of commercial genetic testing. We are entering an era where AI models can analyze your real-time heart rate, your sleep patterns, and your DNA to predict health outcomes with terrifying granular accuracy. Very soon, the massive insurance corporations might know vastly more about your specific personal timeline than you do.
Which means the gatekeepers won't have to rely on averages or guesses anymore. They will just know.
Precisely. And when the unknown becomes perfectly predictable data, does the fundamental concept of pooling pure risk survive at all? If an algorithm knows with 99.9% certainty that you will develop a specific highly expensive condition in exactly 5 years, you are no longer a statistical risk to be pooled, you are a guaranteed financial expense.
And no company is going to insure a guaranteed expense.
Will insurance still function as a shared societal safety net? Or will it just fracture into a hyper-personalized, utterly unaffordable tax on your DNA? It is something to seriously think about the next time your smartwatch pings to tell you it's tracking your heart rate.
That is a staggering implication. It fundamentally threatens to dismantle the law of large numbers entirely. Thank you so much for joining us as the third person at the table today. Until next time, clean the flour out of your vents, check your broker's credentials, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.